In 1995, NASA scientists gave spiders some of the most powerful drugs on the planet and photographed what happened to their webs. What they found broke every assumption they walked in with. Each drug did something different, and sitting at the end of the results, ranked above every illegal, controlled Schedule 1 substance on the list, was the one thing nobody in that lab saw coming. Something you almost certainly had this morning. This is the NASA spider drug trials. The story doesn't actually start with NASA. It starts in 1948 at the University of Tübingen in Germany, with a zoologist named H.M. Peters who had a deeply unglamorous problem. Peters was trying to film spiders building their webs for a documentary. Simple enough, except garden spiders build their webs between 2 and 5 in the morning. For months, Peters and his team stayed up past midnight, set up their cameras, and fell asleep waiting. By the time the sun came up, the web was finished and the spiders had moved on. Peters was getting nothing on film and was running out of patience. So he went to his colleague down the hall, a Swiss pharmacologist named Peter Witt, and asked him a question that had probably never been asked before in the history of science. Can you give these spiders something to make them start earlier? Witt had been studying psychoactive drugs in humans. He had, in his own words, not the slightest idea how they would affect a spider, but he agreed to try. He dissolved a range of substances, marijuana, mescaline, morphine, benzedrine, and several others, into sugar water and administered tiny drops directly into each spider's mouth. One drug per spider. Then he waited. Peters returned the next morning deeply disappointed. None of the drugs had shifted the spider's schedule by a single hour. They still built their webs at 2 in the morning. His documentary project was finished, but Witt was staring at the webs, and he couldn't stop. Every web looked different. The geometry had changed. The architecture had changed. The drug had done something specific and visible to the spider's ability to build, and what it had done was not the same for every substance. Witt abandoned his human drug research that week and spent the next 50 years getting spiders high. He published over 100 papers. He built temperature-controlled rooms with standardized lighting to eliminate variables. He developed a system for photographing webs before and after each drug dose so he could compare the same spider's sober architecture against its impaired version. By the 1980s, he had mapped the effect of more substances on web geometry than any other researcher in history. And then, in 1995, NASA got involved. The researchers at Marshall Space Flight Center had a practical question. Could spider webs be used as a cheap, objective toxicity test for unknown chemicals? Instead of running expensive trials on mammals, which required ethics approvals, controlled environments, and months of monitoring, you could expose a spider to a substance and read the damage directly in the web geometry. The more toxic the chemical, the worse the web. They published their findings in April 1995 in a NASA Tech Briefs report titled Using Spider Web Patterns to Determine Toxicity. The lead researchers were David Noaver, Raymond Krones, and Rachna Relwani. They used Arenaeus diadematus, the European garden spider, and they tested caffeine, benzedrine, marijuana, and chloral hydrate. They expected the results to confirm what Witt had found. They did. And then the caffeine web came back, and it confirmed something nobody had expected. The researchers ran the spiders one at a time. One drug per spider. Then they photographed the web, compared it against that same spider's sober baseline, and moved to the next. The sedative went first. The spider on chloral hydrate started building. Framework, radial spokes, the early spiral, and then stopped. It had fallen asleep mid-construction, and what it left behind looked like a half-finished thought. Incomplete, but still recognizable as a web. Marijuana was next. The spider built, but kept stopping. Long pauses between sections. Gaps where the spiral should have been consistent. It looked less like impairment and more like the spider had simply kept losing the plot. Remembered it was supposed to be doing something, tried again, forgot again. Researchers described it as a lack of focus rather than a loss of skill. Benzedrine produced a web that was structurally complete but geometrically wrong. The spirals were uneven. The spacing between threads was inconsistent. It was a web in the same way a rushed signature is still a signature. Recognizable, but clearly not right. Then the caffeine web came back. No hub, no radial spokes, threads scattered across the frame at angles that had no relationship to each other, as if the spider had simply started throwing silk and never found a reason to stop or start in any particular direction. It wasn't an incomplete web. It wasn't a distorted web. It was the absence of a web disguised as one. The ranking from least to most destructive. The sedative, marijuana, speed, caffeine. Caffeine. In your coffee, your tea, your energy drink, the thing 90% of adults in the developed world consume before they've said a word to another human being, finished first. The gap between caffeine and the rest of the list was visible in the photographs without needing a scale. And that result sat in a 4-paragraph NASA Tech Briefs report for years before anyone thought to ask why. Here's the thing about caffeine that nobody tells you when they hand you your first cup of coffee. It's a weapon, not a metaphor, not a, well, technically situation. Coffee plants tea plants, cacao trees, they all produce caffeine, and not one of them did it for you. They evolved it over hundreds of thousands of years as a chemical defense system. Something was eating them. Insects were chewing through their leaves, their seeds, their stems, and the plants couldn't move, couldn't fight back, couldn't do anything except get creative with their chemistry. So they made caffeine, and caffeine at the concentration found naturally in a coffee leaf is a neurotoxin to insects. It doesn't just impair them, it shuts their nervous systems down. The insect bites the leaf, the caffeine hits its system, and the spider or beetle or whatever it was starts losing motor function, losing spatial coordination. It dies or it retreats, and the plant survives. That is the entire point of caffeine. That is what it was built for. The spider in the NASA lab wasn't getting high, it was getting poisoned, specifically precisely in exactly the way the plant intended. Now, here's where it gets strange for you personally. You drink this every morning, and nothing like that happens. You get mildly more alert, maybe a little anxious if you've had too much, and then you go about your day. The same molecule that dismantled the spider's ability to build anything does nothing more than help you answer emails. The reason is simple. The plant didn't know you were coming. Caffeine was engineered by evolution to target a specific type of nervous system, the kind that runs on a signaling chemical that insects and spiders use and that you don't. Your nervous system processes caffeine through a completely different pathway, and the toxin doesn't find what it's looking for. You're collateral, a bystander species that stumbled onto the battlefield, picked up the weapon, and discovered it tasted good. The spider is the intended target. You are not. The only reason you're still here to read about this is that you were born with the wrong nervous system to die from it. That chaotic web isn't the spider being weird. It's the spider experiencing exactly what the coffee plant designed caffeine to do. You're just watching it from the outside, holding a mug of the same stuff, completely fine. When the NASA study circulated, first in scientific papers, then eventually online, where images of the webs became one of the more shared science visuals of the early internet, the reaction was almost always the same. People looked at the caffeine web, laughed, said something like, "Wow, caffeine is wild," and moved on. That's not what the study said. What Witt had been arguing since the 1950s, and what the NASA paper quietly confirmed, is that the web images are not a commentary on the experience of being caffeinated. They are a direct readout of neurological toxicity. The more chaotic the web, the more damage the substance is doing to the spider's central nervous system. That is the entire basis of the proposed toxicity test. The web is a measurement instrument. So the caffeine web isn't evidence that caffeine makes spiders act weird. It's evidence that caffeine is more neurologically destructive to the spider's central nervous system than marijuana, benzedrine, or a sedative that literally puts the spider to sleep. The popular reading of the spider experiment is that it's a fun fact about drugs. The actual reading, sitting in the original papers, is something more precise. You have built your daily routine around a substance that a plant evolved specifically to kill nervous systems, and the only reason it doesn't kill yours is that your nervous system happens to be the wrong type. The plant didn't know you were coming. You just got lucky with your phylum. Witt published papers on this until 1998, the year he died. The NASA study cited his work. The mechanism was documented, sourced, and sitting in the literature for anyone who wanted to find it. The webs were too interesting. The actual conclusion was less fun to repost. Every morning, somewhere between 300 and 400 million cups of coffee are consumed in the United States alone. It is so embedded in the structure of a normal day that not drinking it is the thing that requires explanation. And somewhere in the evolutionary history of a highland forest in Ethiopia, a plant spent hundreds of thousands of years developing a molecule designed to destroy the nervous system of anything small enough to threaten it. The plant didn't evolve it for alertness. It didn't evolve it for productivity or deadlines or the particular texture of a Tuesday morning before a meeting. It evolved it as a weapon. You are not the target. You are just the creature large enough that the dose doesn't kill you. It only wakes you up. The spider got the honest version.